He had nothing left, not his home, not his family, not even a reason to keep going. But a single conversation with a stranger changed everything. On a bitter Thursday morning in late October, Richard Clay stood on the edge of a pier in Savannah, Georgia, with the Atlantic wind clawing at his coat. He wasn't sure what had brought him here, only that the weight in his chest had finally grown too heavy to carry. Behind him, the pieces of a life once full of promise lay scattered: a failed marriage, a bankrupt hardware business, and a house sold at auction. His hands trembled not from the cold but from the exhaustion of pretending he could still hold it all together. He hadn't told anyone he was leaving. There was no one left to tell. The divorce had finalized 6 months ago, and his ex-wife, Claire, had taken their daughter to live with her parents in North Carolina. His brothers had stopped calling after the third loan request. Even the dog had died. 42 years old and completely alone, Richard had cashed out the last of his retirement savings, a pitiful $3,200, and hit the road in his rusted-out Chevy Silverado with Northwest plan except to drive until the noise in his head quieted. It hadn't. It only got louder. He'd been sleeping in the truck for the past week, parked behind gas stations or at the edges of beach towns where nobody asked questions. Each day he walked aimlessly through unfamiliar streets, clutching a thermos of black coffee like it could anchor him to the earth. But on this morning, standing at the pier, something inside him whispered it was time to let go. Not in a dramatic leap into the ocean way, he wasn't looking for headlines. Just a quiet disappearing. A surrender. That's when he saw the old man. The man was sitting cross-legged on the wooden planks, painting. A canvas rested on his knees, and his fingers, knotted with arthritis, moved with surprising grace. Richard almost turned away. It felt intrusive to interrupt such concentration, but the man looked up and smiled. His eyes were pale blue, watery, but sharp. "You're not from around here," he said, voice like gravel. Richard hesitated. "No. Just passing through." "A lot of people pass through. Most are running from something." "You." Richard let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "Running from everything." The man set his brush down. "Name's Walter. You got time for a story?" Richard shrugged. "I guess I do." They sat side by side, the ocean murmuring below. Walter spoke slowly, like he was peeling back each word with care. He told Richard about a time 30 years ago when he'd lost his wife to cancer, lost his job at the shipyard, and spent 2 years drunk on pain and bad choices. Then one day, he found a paintbrush in a thrift store, bought it on a whim, and started painting trash cans behind the grocery store. People laughed. But eventually, someone offered him $10 for one. Then a local cafe asked him to paint their windows. Now, he made enough to live quietly and feed a rescue cat named Mozart. "It wasn't the money that saved me," Walter said, eyes focused on a seabird diving in the distance. "It was creating something. Even if no one saw it. Even if no one cared. It made me feel like I was still here. Still real." Richard didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "I used to build furniture. With my hands. Made a whole dining table once, no screws, just dovetails. Took me 6 weeks. I haven't touched a tool in 3 years." Walter smiled. "You still can. You've got time. You've got breath. That's all it takes." They parted ways with a handshake and no promises. But that night, Richard parked behind a Goodwill and walked inside. For $5, he bought a cracked hammer, a box of bent nails, and a wooden crate. He didn't sleep much. He was too busy working. The next morning, Richard watched the sunrise from the driver's seat, his fingers raw but his mind oddly still. The crate he had cobbled together wasn't pretty, crooked joints, uneven edges, but it was sturdy. Real. His hands remembered more than he'd expected. He left it beside a bus stop bench with a hand-scrawled sign, "Free. Handmade." Then he walked to the beach and waited. By noon, it was gone. In the days that followed, Richard made more. Crates, small stools, even a narrow bookshelf fashioned from old pallets he found behind restaurants. He left them anonymously around town, sometimes with notes tucked inside, "Built with peace," or "For holding things that matter." He never saw who took them, and he never waited. He just built. One afternoon, while picking through a pile of discarded wood behind a closed cafe, a woman called out from the back door. She wore paint-stained overalls and had a halo of gray curls pinned up under a ball cap. "Hey," she said. "You the guy leaving furniture all over town?" Richard stiffened. "Depends who's asking." She crossed her arms, smiling. "Name's Brenda. I own the shop next door, Curio. Vintage and handmade stuff. Customers keep asking where your pieces come from. You selling?" He blinked. Selling? The idea hadn't crossed his mind. No. Just making." Brenda tilted her head. "Well, if you ever decide to sell, I've got a window and a waiting list." She handed him a card and disappeared inside. Richard stood there for a full minute, card in hand, before letting out a shaky laugh. It was the first time in months he'd laughed without bitterness. That night, he built a bench with arms wide enough for two. He carved a small phrase into the side, "Still here. Still real." He slept in the truck again, but the dreams were different this time. They weren't filled with courtroom echoes or eviction notices. Instead, he dreamed of smooth cedar, of calloused hands sanding until the grain shone like honey. He dreamed of a little girl's voice, his daughter's, laughing at something silly he'd carved into the leg of a chair. The next day, he went back to Brenda. "I'd like to try selling one," he said, holding the bench in his arms. "Just to see." Brenda didn't ask questions. She cleared a spot in the window and set it there, placing a simple tag on the corner, "Local maker. One of a kind." It sold in under an hour. Brenda didn't say much when she handed Richard the envelope, just raised an eyebrow and nodded toward the bench-shaped gap in the front window. The tag had been replaced with a little sold sign in cursive font. Richard opened the envelope like it might vanish. Inside was $180 in cash, and a short note, "You made something real. B." It wasn't just about the money. It was the way she said it, "You made something real." He stood there for a long moment, letting the words settle into the cracks of who he used to be. "Got any more?" Brenda asked, wiping her hands on a rag. "I can," Richard said. "If I find wood." She pointed at the alley behind the store. People drop stuff back there all the time. Broken chairs, crates, shutters. One man's trash is another man's lumber, Richard finished, smiling. That weekend, he made two more pieces, a footstool carved from a half-burned beam and a narrow shelf painted robin's egg blue. Brenda priced them modestly and placed them beside the register. They were gone by Monday. Word spread fast in a town like this. A local blogger featured his work in a short piece titled, "Mystery Carpenter Finds Redemption in Sawdust." The story had a photo of one of his crates with a little heart carved into the side. By the end of the week, 3 more stores called Brenda asking about that guy with the hands. Richard started sleeping in the back of the shop. Brenda offered him the couch, no rent. Said he made the place smell like pine and second chances. In the quiet hours, he sanded wood until his knuckles bled, and he didn't mind. Each scrape of the chisel felt like a prayer. But the work wasn't just for strangers. Late one night, he carved a tiny stool for his daughter, Holly. Her name, shaped in careful cursive, wrapped around the legs. He wrapped it in a blanket and mailed it to her, care of her grandparents. No note. Just the stool. 2 weeks later, a package arrived at Curio. No return address. Inside was a photograph, Holly, sitting on the stool in a yellow dress, grinning with missing teeth. On the back, written in Claire's unmistakable handwriting, "She loves it. She misses you. We both do." Richard sat on the floor of the shop for a long time, the photo in one hand and his other pressed against his chest like he was afraid his heart might come loose. Brenda found him there and didn't say a word. Just poured him a cup of coffee and slid it next to his knee. The quiet between them was the kind that didn't need filling. By winter, Richard's work was in 4 shops across 2 counties. He had more orders than hands, and he hired a teenager named Eli to help him sort scrap and sweep sawdust. Eli's dad had walked out the year before, and Richard never asked about it. He just taught him how to measure a board properly and that splinters were a part of life, but most of them came out eventually. They worked through Christmas. Richard gave Eli a hand-carved toolbox with his name etched on the lid. "You're not an apprentice anymore," he said. "You're a builder." Eli cried. Tried to hide it, but didn't quite manage. The money wasn't crazy. Not yet. But it was steady. Enough that Richard stopped checking his bank balance with dread. Enough to send Claire some, just in case. Enough to stop counting pennies at the pump. Then, one rainy afternoon in March, a black Mercedes pulled up in front of Curio. A man in a navy overcoat stepped out, holding an umbrella and a magazine. Brenda raised an eyebrow as he entered, looking around with the kind of face that expected to be served. "Can I help you?" she asked, arms crossed. "I'm looking for the carpenter," he said. "Richard Clay." Richard stepped out from the back, wiping his hands on a rag. "That's me." The man extended the magazine. It was a glossy architecture journal, turned to a 2-page spread with a photo of one of Richard's benches. "I'm Franklin Bell. I own Bell Design and Home. We supply furnishings to boutique hotels, designer homes, clients with very particular tastes." Richard blinked. "Okay." Bell smiled like a man used to hearing yes. "I'd like to offer you a contract. You build. We pay. Handsomely." Richard glanced at Brenda, who said nothing, but her eyes were sharp. "And if I say no?" he asked. Bell shrugged. "Then I find someone else who can make benches with soul. But I'd rather it be you." That night, Richard didn't sleep. Not because of fear, because of possibility. For the first time in years, he had something to lose. And something worth protecting. Richard sat across from Franklin Bell 2 days later at a cafe Brenda insisted on vetting first. "No deals in back alleys," she'd said. "Not for my carpenter." Bell had come prepared, portfolio, contract draft, even fabric samples for custom pieces. Richard, in a flannel shirt with sawdust in his beard, felt like a splintered board next to polished marble. "We're offering a 6-month trial run," Bell said, flipping pages. "You deliver 10 custom pieces a month. Simple, clean design. We'll provide materials. Starting at $5,000 a month, plus commission on sales. $5,000 per month." Richard stared at the number like it might vanish. A year ago, he couldn't afford oil changes. Now, a stranger in a tailored coat wanted to bankroll his second chance. "I'll need help," he said slowly. "I've got a kid working with me, Eli." Bell nodded. "Bring him on. We'll pay him too. Full training." This could be big, Richard. National exposure. It sounded like a dream. But something about it itched. After the meeting, Richard walked the length of the beach. He thought of Walter's cracked hands. Of Brenda's quiet faith. Of the little girl in the yellow dress, sitting on the stool with his name carved underneath. Could he do this without losing what made it all feel real? Brenda met him in the workshop that night, her face unreadable. He laid the contract on the table between them. "He wants 10 a month," Richard said. "Custom pieces. Real money. You gonna take it?" "I don't know." Brenda picked up the paper, scanned it, then handed it back. "Depends what you're building for. Money's a tool. Same as a saw." That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He stood in front of the bench he was carving, oak and walnut, sturdy and balanced. He ran his fingers over the grain and asked himself, what did I want when I started? What do I want now? At sunrise, he walked to the pier. Walter wasn't there, he hadn't been for weeks, but Richard still sat on the same wooden slats. In his pocket, he found a coin Walter had given him that first day, a dull brass token from some forgotten arcade, worn smooth. "You've got time. You've got breath," Richard whispered. "That's all it takes." By the afternoon, he made his choice. He would sign the contract, but on one condition: every piece he made had to carry his maker's mark, and no two could be exactly alike. Bell balked at first. "It complicates scaling," he said. "Then find someone else," Richard replied. 3 days later, Bell returned with a revised deal. Richard signed it with Brenda beside him. The first commission came in the mail a week later, a boutique hotel in Charleston wanted a series of story benches, each one inspired by a life, with a phrase carved underneath. Richard read the request 3 times. He sat in the quiet of his shop, sketching designs on paper that smelled faintly of cedar and ink. And for the first time in a very long time, he felt something close to certainty. Not every life gets a clean slate. But sometimes, if you're lucky, you get a second pass with the chisel. The first batch of story benches shipped in mid-May. Each one bore a phrase suggested by the hotel's guests: "I waited anyway, she danced in storms, home isn't a place." Richard carved every word himself. Some nights, the messages stayed with him in dreams. Orders doubled by June. Then tripled. Bell sent assistants, stylists, even a photographer. "The story sells," he said. "People want meaning with their mahogany." But meaning took time. By July, Richard was in the shop 18 hours a day. He barely saw Brenda. Eli worked without breaks, dark circles under his eyes. The shop lost its smell of pine and coffee, now it reeked of varnish and stress. Brenda cornered him one night, arms crossed, face hard. "You're chasing the numbers, Richard. Not the craft." "I'm trying to keep up." "With what? Sales? Or ghosts?" He didn't answer. That weekend, Richard missed a phone call. The number was North Carolina. His heart stopped when he played the voicemail. "Hi, Dad. It's me. Holly. Mom said I could call. I got your stool. And the photo. Thank you. I hope you're okay. I'm doing a school project on family businesses. Maybe I could visit sometime. Okay. Bye." Her voice was small but clear. No hesitation. Richard didn't move for nearly an hour. That night, he sat alone in the shop. A half-built bench waited under the lamp. He picked up a chisel, then set it down. Picked it up again. Finally, he stood and walked outside. He didn't tell anyone he was leaving. Just packed a duffel, grabbed the photo of Holly, and drove. It was a 6-hour trip to Claire's parents' house. The house looked the same, green shutters, dogwood trees, but smaller now. Time does that to things. Claire opened the door, startled but not unkind. "She's in the backyard," she said. "I didn't tell her you were coming. Figured that was yours to do." He found Holly sitting in a hammock, reading. "Hey," he said softly. She looked up, blinked, then broke into a smile that nearly knocked him over. "Dad." She ran to him and wrapped her arms around his waist like she used to. They talked for hours. About school, about furniture, about mistakes. At one point, Holly said, "I don't care if you're rich. I just care if you show up." Later, Claire walked him to the driveway. "She needs you, Richard. Not just letters and wood. You." He nodded. "I need her too." He stayed the weekend. They built a birdhouse together, Holly and him. She painted it purple and wrote, "Still here, still real" on the side. When he returned to Savannah, Brenda was waiting. "You look lighter," she said. "I left some weight behind." Then he did something radical. He paused production for a week. Told Belle no more than 5 commissions a month. Told Eli to sleep. Told himself to breathe. And slowly, the shop began to smell like pine again. Autumn brought crisp winds and unexpected peace. The orders kept coming, but now at Richard's pace. No mass production. No compromise. Each piece still carried his maker's mark, a small RC branded near the base, and always a phrase, something honest. Loved anyway. Held together. Forgiven. People noticed. An editor from a major lifestyle magazine called. "Your benches are like memoirs you can sit on," she said. The headline ran, "The Carpenter of Second Chances." Overnight, Richard became a name. Hotels called. Celebrities called. Even a senator's wife requested a custom reading nook. Belle sent champagne. Brenda just raised an eyebrow and poured him black coffee. "You ready for the spotlight?" she asked. "I'm ready for the light," he said. "Spot or not." He used the money to lease a bigger space nearby. But he didn't abandon the old shop. He turned it into a community studio. Brenda ran it. Eli taught kids on Saturdays. Richard floated between the two, carving, guiding, mentoring. But with success came temptation. Bell invited Richard to a private event in Atlanta. A gathering of investors, he said. Big names. They're interested in licensing. Franchising. We're talking real scale. The event was held in a gallery lined with photographs of Richard's benches. But something was off. Too clean. Too curated. No smell of sawdust, no wood grain under fingers, just glossy prints and price tags. A woman in pearls approached. You're the craftsman, she said. Darling work. I bought one for my lake house. Would you consider producing in teak? I don't work in teak, he said. She laughed. You do now. Later, Bell clinked a glass beside him. They want 100 units by spring. Mass production. Overseas facilities. You'd still be the face, of course. But no more sanding benches at midnight. Richard didn't answer. He walked outside and looked at the skyline. Too many lights. Not enough stars. When he got back to Savannah, he met with Brenda and Eli in the old shop. They sat at the long bench they'd built together, the one that started it all. I need to ask you both something, he said. They want me to sell the name. Mass-produce everything. Make a fortune. Brenda didn't blink. What's it worth to you? Eli stared at the tools. Would we still make things? Richard looked around at the wood shavings on the floor, at the birdhouse holly painted still hanging in the corner. No, he said. Not like this. It'd be a name. Not a place. Brenda nodded. Then you already know. He called Bell the next morning. Turned down the deal. Bell was stunned. You're walking away from millions. I'm not walking away, Richard said. I'm staying where I belong. That night, he started carving a new bench. For Holly. The phrase? Built for love, not for sale. Spring arrived in Savannah the way it always did, soft winds, magnolias in bloom, and salt in the air. Richard stood outside the shop early one morning, coffee in hand, watching Eli unlock the door. Keys suit you, Richard said. Eli grinned. Feels right. The new studio had become a cornerstone in the community. Retirees carved spoons in the afternoons. High schoolers came on weekends. Even Brenda taught classes now, crafts for the craftless, she called it. Richard no longer built alone. He guided. Oversaw. Sometimes he simply sat in the corner with a cup of tea and watched others create. The joy wasn't in the fame. It was in the echo of tools and laughter. One warm Saturday, Holly arrived with a suitcase and a sketchbook. Just for the summer, Claire said, I's meeting Richards with something that wasn't quite forgiveness, but close. Richard and Holly spent their days in the back room sanding planks and telling stories. She asked about every scar on his hands, and he answered with a smile. He taught her to plane, to measure twice, to let the wood guide the work. You're good at this, he told her once. She beamed. Runs in the grain. They built a bench together, low, sturdy, with curved arms like outstretched wings. Holly chose the phrase, begin again. Customers loved it. One woman cried when she sat on it, saying it reminded her of her brother who used to build swings from fence posts. They let her have it at cost. Richard never forgot the feeling. That summer, a reporter from a national news channel came to do a story. Cameras rolled. Lights glared. Richard answered politely, but only lit up when asked about Eli, about Holly, about the community studio. The segment aired under the title, The Carpenter Who Chose Roots Over Riches. Richard didn't watch it. Brenda did. Twice. That fall, he started something new. A foundation, still real, dedicated to teaching hands-on trades to young people across Georgia. He used his earnings to seed it, hired local teachers, and gave every student their own starter toolset. Real work builds real people, the pamphlet said. And when asked if he wanted to expand, he answered simply, not yet. Let it grow at its own pace. Like a tree. One crisp evening, Richard sat on the porch of his modest home outside town, Holly sketching beside him, Eli fixing a hinge on the gate. Claire pulled up in her car and joined them for dinner. No one talked about the millions he'd turned down. They talked about what Holly was carving next. About Eli's plans to open a second workshop. About Brenda's new grandbaby. Later, Holly handed Richard a folded paper. Inside was a drawing of a bench, delicate, balanced, full of curves and heart. At the bottom, in her neat handwriting, "For the man who built me a life when he thought he'd lost his own." Richard swallowed hard. "You sure you don't want to be an architect?" She shook her head. "I want to be like you." And in that moment, surrounded by wood, by people, by second chances, Richard Clay finally understood. He hadn't become rich when the magazine wrote about him. He hadn't become rich when the checks started coming in. He became rich the moment he stopped running and started building again, with his hands, with his heart, with love. He was never trying to make millions. He was building something that would outlast him. Something real. Something that mattered.